Welcome back to Shaw Spotlight. I'm here with outdoorsman, angler Gord Ellis. Gord, we're going to talk today about one of the best things you can do in northwestern Ontario when it's cold outside. We're going to talk about ice fishing. Why is ice fishing such a great sport?
Oh, you're right, Janis. It is a great outdoor activity. It's a great sport. Um, it's a good way, it's a good way to get outside right now. I mean, between what we're going through with the lockdown and just winter in general, on a normal winter, you get cabin fever, and the walls start to close in. Well, the walls have been closing in since last March, you know. So it's a good way to get outside. And I actually, just for you, I set up my little pop-up tent so I can pretend that I'm out on the lake. I'm actually in the backyard right now, but I have some of my gear here, and we're going to talk about why it's fun and how to do it. But it is a really great way to get outside, get some fresh air, yeah, and get some sun. Like I was out on Sunday yesterday, uh, and just the feeling of actually seeing the sun and getting like vitamin D in your eyeballs and breathing that fresh air. I needed it. I'll tell you right now. Fishing wasn't that great, but it was so good to get outside.
So, when it comes to ice fishing, you said you're in a tent. Do you have to have a tent? Can you just go set up in the middle of a lake? What do you need to ice fish?
Don't need a tent. You can set out in the middle of the lake. In fact, most of the time really up until the last 15, 20 years, I never used any kind of cover. We went out on the lake and we would have a fire at shore, and that's where we kept warm. You can still do that, when it's not too windy, it's fine sitting out in the middle of the lake. But it's the wind that gets you, right? Even if it's mild, like it can be -4, -5, but as soon as that wind starts howling, it gets cold fast. So it is nice to have shelter. And of course, besides these different kinds of tents, there's also shacks, and like a lot of it's a very popular thing in northwestern Ontario now, in particular, to have a shack that's out on the lake. It's left out there. People go out and they sleep on them. They have satellite dishes. They have an outhouse. It's like a little mini cottage, really. But no, you don't need all that. In fact, ice fishing is one of the simplest things. It comes down to digging a hole in the ice, which you have to have an auger for. That's a key thing. And then a line, a hook, and a stick, and that's your basic ice fishing setup.
So, what about like fishing rod, the lures you use? Well, how is it different from fishing in the summer?
So I'm going to show you some of the ice fishing stuff I have here. Your basic ice fishing rod, obviously, it's a lot shorter because you don't need a 7, 8 foot rod because you're fishing in an 8-inch hole and you're generally fishing close to it. So it's very similar in every other way to a normal fishing rod. It's got a spinning reel. We have our line, rod guides here. The difference is much shorter and generally a little bit softer, not quite as heavy. You can use heavier rods. I mean, if you're fishing for a larger fish like a pike, for instance, or lake trout, you'll want to have a heavier rod. But this is a medium light action, and this will catch trout, perch, um, walleye, most of the favored species. And you can put them in a holder. You can jig them. Just put a minnow on a jig, just like you would in the summer. Drop it down the hole and jig away. Or you can. There's different ways to hold have a set line. Here's one that's a homemade one. It's just a dowel. And what I do is I just put the rod on the dowel like so, and then balance it. And when the fish bites, the rod goes down. I go over and grab it. That's it. I mean, you can get this, home hardware and buy the parts for $15. All sorts of different ways to catch them, Janis. Another technique I'll show that's good for, especially for things like pike, is what's called a tip up. And a tip up is it's basically just a trap for fish. And the bottom of it goes in the water. It's got a reel on it with some line. And then this sits on top of the hole. So you actually place that down in the hole. And then you got a little flag here, and you set your flag. And then when the fish takes the bait, which is usually like a herring or a sucker minnow, the line pulls and the flag pops. And it's the simplest thing. They've been around forever. They work really great, and you can sit up on shore by your fire and wait for the flags to pop.
So, you mentioned minnows. Do you have to use live bait or can you use lures? Is there any difference there?
Yeah. So a lot of ice fishermen use live bait, and that's because fish are hungry in the winter, and live bait looks good. smells good, looks realistic, obviously. So I would say probably 70-80% of your fishing, for the most part, you use live bait, mostly minnows. There are some, you can use worms too for things like brook trout or speckled trout. But there's also different lures you can use. I have a couple here. This is a really pretty one. It's called a Bucktail Jig. And I'll get that a little closer there. It's basically a fly on a jig head. These work great. You can just fish it like that, or you can put a little bit of worm on it if you want. It's a little bit of a taster. That's a good lure. Also for jigging, this is a spoon. There's all sorts of different kinds of spoons. Janis, this is actually one called a Williams Whitefish. But there's little Cleo and there's rattlesnakey and crocodiles. And basically, they have Swedish Pimples, my favorite, by the way. That's the all-time best spoon name, the Swedish Pimple. You basically drop it to the bottom and then you jig it. So you're just pulling your line and your spoon is jigging and flashing, and the fish comes and grabs it. You don't have to use any bait for that. You can just use them straight, or you can, if you want, you can put a minnow on it or a worm. But a lot of times I'll just fish the spoon absolutely straight and just fish it on the bottom.
Okay, so now we know what equipment you need. I'm a bit of a safety person. How do
Yes.
you know when the lake is frozen enough for you to go on it? How do you know
Well,
when the ice is safe?
Ice, ice is a bit tricky, and I'm very, very cautious with ice. I've had a few over the years. I've had a few experiences. I've never gone through, but I've come very, very close. It's not a good feeling. It's very scary. I'm extremely careful. It's a good idea, especially early in the season, to check the ice before you go on. Like right at shore, I'll dig a hole like just a few feet out and check to see. I'm comfortable if I see over 6 inches of ice generally. You can wear a flotation device. In fact, I have a snowmobile suit that's a floater suit. So theoretically, if you go in, you'll float. Although you don't have a lot of time to get out of the water in the winter. You have to get out of the water very quickly. And I'll tell you one thing that I carry around with me is just these set of spikes. And what these are for is if you did go in, God forbid, the points on the end of them, you can actually get up on the ice and pull yourself out, and they go together, and you could actually wear them around your neck. So they just kind of slip in together. I can't really see that well, but there we go. Yeah, so it just slips together, and then you can put it around your neck or in your pocket, and then they're handy for you. A very good thing to have, a good safety device. Other thing with ice fishing, always tell somebody where you're going, and don't change that plan. So if you're saying, I'm going to go out on Lake Superior down near Silver Harbor, don't decide at the last minute to go to Hazelwood Lake. Because if you get it, and there's not just going through the ice can be a problem. I've gotten lost on the lake in the wintertime when a storm blew in and all of a sudden you can't see land anymore. It's really scary. So it's always a good idea that people know where you are. This year we've had kind of funny weather for the ice. Some areas haven't frozen quite as well as others, so be very cautious.
Is there any rule of thumb for when the fish will bite? Is it ever too cold for the fish? Is it ever too warm? Like I know as humans, it could be too cold for us, but what about the fish?
I'm finding it's getting too cold a lot more often for me. If you have a shack, it's not so bad, or a tent. But there are species that really like it cold, like lake trout. For whatever reason, the colder and brighter it is, the better it is for lake trout fishing. Why? I don't know, but it can be minus 30, absolutely horribly cold, and it can be the best lake trout fishing ever. For things like perch and walleye, it seems like if the air is a little warmer, the bite's a little warmer. I don't know how they sense that under the ice. Like, how do they know? But that just seems to be a rule of thumb. Need good clothes, Janis, too. You need very good boots are extremely important. Insulated boots. I have a suit, an insulated suit, good underwear, hand warmers. Put them in your pockets. Have a good toque, something to wrap around your face. It can get cold.
Well, Gord, you obviously have a lot of experience with ice fishing. You've been doing it for most of your life. What do you love about it? What's your favorite thing?
Well, it's a way to go fishing in the wintertime. That's a biggie for me because we have a long winter here, as you know. And if you like to fish and you don't ice fish, you're pretty much hooped. we don't have a lot of open water here this time of year. So for me, it's getting out ice fishing. I do like the camaraderie of it. I fished with my family, my kids when they were small. We spent a ton of time ice fishing. In fact, I was out with my son just the other day and his partner, and we had a great time. It's a great family activity. Northwestern Ontario is unbelievably beautiful in the winter. Like, it's just the starkness of it. There's something beautiful in just that gray and white and blue sky. It's quite amazing.
Well, Gord, thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. Hopefully, we'll be able to get some more people outside and doing a perfect winter pastime. As long as it's not too cold. I know it's the cold that gets me. I wouldn't be out there in the cold.
It can be too. There are days it's too cold, Janis. Absolutely. But most of the time, we can dress for it and get out there. So yeah, it's a great time, and I love talking about it.